Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. But you knew that. That's why you're listening. I'm delighted to have on Jason Richwine. He's with the Heritage Foundation, one of the country's premier think tanks, certainly one of the country's premier conservative think tanks. Been around back before conservatism was even cool, back in the late 1970s. I think it got started in 78, and is now well known internationally, not just nationally, for its footprint in public policy and helping to provide robust information for the debate on the direction this country should go towards. Immigration is always a hot topic, particularly here in Texas, and the cost of immigration, I don't think, is often included in the debate. New study pegs that cost as rather massive when you look at all the numbers out there. And Jason, you're going to give us some insight on that study. Welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So tell us about the study that you guys have done. Is this, I'm assuming, something Heritage produced?
Yes, it's a Heritage Foundation study that I worked on with my co-author, Robert Rector. And what we did was try to add up the costs of an amnesty that would take place in the current immigration reform bill that is being considered right now. We're really the only group to look at the full fiscal cost. And when I say full fiscal cost, I mean expenditures, all expenditures, federal, state, and local. And what we also did is look at the taxes that immigrants pay. And so we were able to compare the total taxes paid with the total amount of government services used, the total cost of those things. And what we find, not surprisingly, is that fiscal cost is really quite large. If an amnesty is to go through, that means that illegal immigrants currently here will be able to access the whole panoply of government services, and that would add up to the tune of about $6.3 trillion. That's with a T, trillion dollars.
$6.3 trillion. So I'll put that in perspective for my audience. That's our national debt is now pushing $17 trillion, and our whole gross domestic product is $16 trillion. So it sounds like you're an alarmist.
Well, you know,
if you're right, I'm alarmed. But that sounds outrageous, to be honest with you, Jason.
Well, keep in mind it is spread over the lifetime of illegal immigrants, so it's an accumulated deficit. But nevertheless, it is still quite a large number, and I think something that most Americans would be unwilling to pay. What's important to understand here is that one of the major drivers of this cost is the access to Social Security and Medicare that immigrants who receive amnesty would receive, something like 30 or 40 years down the line. So whenever people talk about the cost, sometimes supporters will only look at, say, the next 10 years. That's the way the CBO does it, the Congressional Budget Office. That leaves out the major costs. In fact, the funny thing is, it's awfully convenient that in this bill, that has the amnesty provision, the way the federal benefit structure works is that the first 10 years of the amnesty, the immigrants who receive it are not eligible for many federal benefits. They become eligible after that, just so happens to be after the time period looked at by the CBO.
Yeah. So tell me, when other people kind of try to size up the study, or the economic impact, what do they look at that you don't, that is different from what you're looking at? What are they excluding when they look at it?
Well, as I said, the main difference really is that we have the full comprehensive approach to this. One other problem with the CBO and others is they look only at the federal budget. And, of course, that's important, but you have to look at the impact on states and localities as well. Public schooling, police, firefighter, highways, all of those things are affected by immigration. And so, a dollar paid to a state government is worth the same as a dollar paid to the federal government from the taxpayer's perspective. So you have to include all of these things. And as I said, probably most importantly, you have to look at the full life cycle of immigrants who receive amnesty. You can't just pick the 10-year period that has the smallest impact and say, don't worry about things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how inconsequential some of these people in the public policy arena think. And that's absolutely huge, although my producer very wisely and aptly pointed out that it doesn't really matter because, Social Security and Medicare probably won't be around in 30 years anyway.
Well, it's possible, but I'm saying that it certainly hastens the doom of those programs if you're going to bring in people who are going to receive a lot more, or at least be promised a lot more than they're paying in.
Yeah, but, isn't it pretty imperative that this immigration reform take place so that the Democratic Party can become the institutional revolutionary party of the United States, kind of like they have in Mexico, where the same party rules for all but 4 years over the last half a century? I mean, how else are they going to be able to pull that off?
Yeah,
I don't mean to sound cynical, but I'll be honest with you, I am.
Well, it is interesting how oftentimes Democrats are willing to give helpful advice, quote unquote, to Republicans on this issue. You keep hearing people on the left say, you really have to pass this amnesty. You really need to. Otherwise, you may not be popular with certain segments of the population. I just think it's kind of strange that they would be so willing to offer that advice, given that they don't want Republicans to do well. I would think that Republicans should be a bit suspicious when people who are their explicit opponents are giving them advice about how to compete with them.
Right. To me, it's very analogous to a football team calling up their opponent for next week's game and tell them how to play them.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, let me tell you how you can beat us. This is what you got to do. And of course, no coach is going to take that advice, yet somehow the GOP is like sitting on the edge of his seat, wanting to know the next thing the Democrats have to tell them on how to win.
Yeah, it's a strange situation, to be sure.
It really is. So, what's your thoughts about this, the passage of this? I hear it's getting some pretty serious push in the Senate, and obviously it has no future in the House, but your thoughts?
There are a lot of people, a lot of special interests who want to see it passed. Unfortunately, it's a major priority of business groups. The thing is, immigration in some ways is kind of like corporate welfare, because businesses get cheap labor because you bring in people who are willing to work at lower wages, but the costs of that labor, the cost in terms of all the government benefits, all of the schooling and hospitalization, all that falls on taxpayers. That does not fall on the corporations who enjoy the cheap labor. If corporations had to pay that cost rather than taxpayers, I think you would see businesses being much less interested in bringing in, so-called cheap labor. So that's one of the problems. It's the classic story where, the profits are privatized, but the costs are socialized. That's what's going on right here. Unfortunately, those are very powerful lobbies, and there are a lot of people on Capitol Hill who listen to those lobbies, and there are also a lot of people for whom, immigration is not something that seems to touch their daily lives. They don't live in areas with a high immigrant population. They don't compete personally with the labor of immigrants. So it's not something that they can see the costs of very tangibly. Yeah. But nevertheless, one of the things we're trying to do with this report is say, hey, here it is quantified. Here are the numbers. Please pay attention to this before you vote.
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, corporations don't pay any taxes anyway. All they are is tax collectors. You and I both know that, as long as a company's making a profit, which is the only reason why they would pay taxes, it's just a fixed cost of doing business just like everything else. I wish we could do away with a system that's really a shell game that prohibits job creation and job growth. And I really spoke too quickly about not going anywhere in the House with John Let's Make a Deal Boehner as Speaker of the House. You never know what can happen over there.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think that what it might come down to is whether or not the Speaker is willing to bring a bill to the floor that he knows does not have support from the majority of his own caucus.
He's never done that before, has he?
Right. He generally does not want to do that, but we'll see what kind of political pressures he's put under.
Yeah, I don't know if I should call him Monty Hall or the guy who likes to throw people under the bus. I don't know, but he's good at both. Anyway, oh boy, I tell you, you did nothing to lift up my morale, but you did keep me better informed. Jason Richwine, he's with the Heritage Foundation, one of the country's premier think tanks. You can check him out at heritage.org. Plus, I check out The Foundry, which is their great content producing machine, thefoundry.org. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
When we come back, we're going to have more for you. I do want to remind you, best content here shows up over there at usdailyreview.com. You're listening to The Price of Business.